What is the role of a Christian minister, whether lay or ordained? To lead worship? To preach and teach? To provide pastoral care for people in need? What about enabling and equipping God's people for fruitful and faithful mission and ministry and vibrant relationship with Jesus in the whole of life? These words from a report for the Church of England called Setting God's People Free reflect a hugely important cultural shift currently taking place in the life of the Church throughout the world, in which we are coming to recognise the vital role of lay Christians in mission and ministry. This means that along with the life of the gathered church, where Christians come together for worship and teaching, study and prayer, and join in church-based mission initiatives, we are coming to recognise the importance of the scattered or sent church, where Christians live their lives from Sunday to Saturday, where they meet those who don't yet know Christ, acting as salt and light in God's world, exercising influence and perhaps leadership in their families, their workplaces, voluntary activities, and leisure pursuits. So how do we, as full-time theological educators, associate staff, supervisors and training ministers, equip our ministerial students for both the gathered and the sent church? How do we give them the skills to enable the whole people of God to live out whole life discipleship, or what the Church of England is coming to call everyday faith? To live as Christian disciples, exercise influence for Christ, and contribute to the coming of God's kingdom in all the spheres of everyday life. I'm David Hayward, a writer and consultant in the field of Christian ministry and ministerial formation. This video is an introduction to the online learning program Formation for Enabling Ministry, whose aim is to equip you to train ministers confident and competent to enable whole life discipleship, as well as minister to the gathered church. This is not necessarily an easy task. In many places, it's only relatively recently that the Church has come to recognise the importance of whole life discipleship for its life and mission. Moreover, inherited patterns of training have not been geared to equipping ministers to enable the ministry of the whole Church. And there are considerable obstacles to Christian discipleship in the world of work and society generally. So how do we equip ourselves to train the ministers of the future? Ministers capable of multiplying their impact by enabling others to live out their faith in all the spheres of life. If you're a theological educator, you come with expert knowledge of your subject discipline, Old or New Testament, theology, ethics, church history, and so on. Our role is to share our enthusiasm and familiarise our students with these areas of knowledge. But we also know that the task is greater than this. We want students to apply these areas of knowledge in their ministries, to live out the truths we have taught them and pass them on to others, to apply them to everyday life so that they become more than subject knowledge, but rather a lens through which to interpret their experience of life and help others to do the same. And if you're a supervisor or training minister, or your subject area is a practical one, you'll be drawing on your experience to help students and newly ordained ministers become familiar with ministerial practice, leading worship, preaching and evangelism, leading groups and chairing meetings. But you will also want to see them become disciple-making disciples, ministers with the skills to help others to live the Christian life in their own very different contexts. Put simply, Formation for Enabling Ministry offers two things that will equip you to do this effectively. A way of thinking about the whole enterprise of ministerial formation, and a set of skills to help you to meet the challenge. The first is the subject of Stage 1, the first 4 units, and the second of Stage 3, the last 4, while Stage 2 explores the links between them. What do I mean by a way of thinking? We use the word formation because we realise that preparation for ministry is more than education and more than training. It's about the whole person. At its heart, it is a redirection of our affections, seeking first God's kingdom, placing it above every other priority in our lives. It's not just about becoming experts in the Bible and theology, but learning to see the whole of life from a Christian perspective. It's about learning to make Christian practices, prayer, study of the Bible, worship, periods of silence and Sabbath, integral to our lives. It's about hearing and responding to God's call on our lives, transformation and readiness to suffer along with Christ. And formation is something that takes place in community. We learn with and from our fellow Christians, supported by them and committed to life in this community. So what kind of learning process is formation? There's a concept that comes to our aid in answering this question, the concept of a practice. Alistair MacIntyre describes a practice as a coherent, complex and cooperative human activity. This means that practices are everywhere. Occupations like farming, running a business, scientific research, the arts like music and painting, leisure activities like football, cricket or chess. And at home, nurturing a family can be thought of as a practice. Each has a social context, a history or tradition behind it, and a set of goals, mutually agreed between the practitioners and the society in which the practice is set. And here is the crucial part. Learning a practice is more than intellectual. It involves not only knowledge and skills, but the affections and the virtues. Virtues like patience, diligence, humility, and justice are integral to many, if not most, practices. Crucially, practices are learned in community. They are learned through participation with and from other practitioners. And finally, practices shape our identity. Learning a practice means learning how to be a teacher, a scientist, a mother or father, or a footballer. So, what kind of learning is formation? It is learning to inhabit a practice. Identifying with the community of Christian disciples or ministers, learning the perspectives of that community, participating in its characteristic routines like prayer and Bible study, growing in the virtues the practice requires, like love, humility, the ability to forgive, allowing the practice to shape our identity. And of course, because we are talking about Christian practices, we recognize that in all this the Holy Spirit is at work, bringing a vertical dimension of relationship with Christ, so that the development of Christian identity is not just conformity, but becoming the unique individuals Christ would have us be. As a theological educator or supervisor, you're a member of at least 2 and possibly 3 communities of practice: Christian discipleship, Christian ministry, and theological scholarship. Christian ministry sits at the intersection of these 3 communities with a foot in both the other 2. The task of the minister is to draw on the Church's tradition of theology and biblical interpretation, much of which has taken place in an academic context, to enable and empower everyday disciples to respond to God's call in the places of their everyday life and work. That means becoming a bridge between the world of academic study and the world of everyday life. Our task is to equip them to become those bridges. So how do we achieve that? This is where the second aspect of the programme comes in. I'm suggesting that we do this through learning and practicing the skills of adult education in our classrooms and in learning in context. Stage 3 is an introduction to those skills. For some, this may be a refresher, but for others, some of it may be new. For example, adult education is life-centered. Learners come to be equipped for the challenges they face or develop interests that are relevant to them. So learning adult education skills will mean designing our teaching so that the application of our subject area to ministry is always apparent to the students, and providing plenty of opportunities to apply their learning to life and ministry. Another characteristic of adults is that they bring plenty of relevant experience to their learning. In fact, the learner's experience is a key resource. They may not have our level of expertise, but they do have both experience and opinions. The skill of the adult educator is to begin from where the students are, so that the new learning immediately makes sense, and they can connect it with their existing knowledge and experience. By bringing their own experience to the session, they experience deep learning, the learning that makes a real difference in how they think and feel about the world. And a skillful adult educator provides plenty of opportunities for students to learn from one another. And to give a third example, developing the skills of the adult educator enables us to be much more flexible and sophisticated about the transfer of information. You will already be familiar with the problem of students forgetting what they hear in a traditional lecture. This is the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, which tells us that within an hour they will have forgotten more than half of what you've told them, and by the next day this will have risen to 2/3. But learning the skills of adult education will equip you with a range of alternative methods for imparting information. As an adult educator, you don't cease to be the expert, but your role shifts from the fount of all knowledge to the facilitator of learning. Instead of preparing lectures, you'll be preparing learning tasks to enable your students to engage with the subject area and relate it to both everyday faith and ministry. You're probably doing some of this already. The aim of the programme is to help you to do it in a more thoroughgoing and informed way, and to equip supervisors with the skills to facilitate learning in context. Here's how it works. You can find the programme on the Anglican Communion Moodle site. The web address is given on this screen. Log in first as a guest. Once you have logged in, the introductory module will explain how to register for the programme. It will be a great advantage if a group of colleagues work through the programme together, discussing it as they go. But if you're on your own, don't worry. The programme works perfectly well for individuals. There are 3 stages. In stage 1, you encounter the 4 concepts that are basic to the rest of the programme: everyday faith or whole life discipleship, the concept of a practice, experiential learning, and communities of practice. Each unit will take you between 2 and 4 hours. If you're familiar with any of these concepts already, you'll know that it is what is known as a threshold concept. That is a piece of learning that changes the way you see things. It's like passing through a doorway from a partial understanding to a more coherent and comprehensive one. It may be challenging at first, but the outcome is a clearer vision. These 4 concepts will equip you with a vision of what we're doing in ministerial formation, which will form the foundation for the rest of your learning on the programme. Stage 2 begins to bring these concepts together, showing how the understanding of experiential learning and communities of practice helps us to make sense of the way people grow as disciples and learn ministry, as well as tackling two of the most important topics to arise: theological reflection and the difference between academic and everyday theology. Finally, Stage 3 equips you to incorporate the skills of adult education into your practice. You'll become familiar with the characteristics of adult learners and learn how to design a variety of learning tasks so that your students become active learners, exploring the subject together and working out how to apply it to discipleship and ministry. Unit 11 is designed for supervisors who will be designing learning in context, and Unit 12 is for subject specialists. You don't need to stick to the order of the units if you prefer not to. The program is designed to take you through in a certain way, but in the end it's up to you how you choose to tackle it. I hope you'll enjoy the program, but most of all, I hope you'll become much more fruitful as a teacher or supervisor through learning how to facilitate learning for others.